And I thank you very much for coming to the panel discussion on Beyond Morocco's Elections, Prospects for Genuine Reform. My name is Charles Dunn. I'm the Director for Middle East and North Africa programs at Freedom House. And I thank POMED for scheduling this in a building that is our next door neighbor, so you didn't have too far to walk in the cold. I think this is a very, very timely panel because we're now coming up on really the second set of elections, parliamentary elections, to have taken place in the region since the start of the Arab Spring, the first, of course, being the Tunisian elections. We followed close on by the Egyptian elections, and I think we'll see quite a few contrasts between the three sets. But I think in particular, Morocco has not gotten enough attention recently as it's gone through its own set of political changes. I mean, for one thing, it's located sort of on the Arab periphery. There's a perception that there are a few major U.S. economic or military interests there, and obviously it's been overshadowed by the more dramatic uprisings that have been going on elsewhere in the region. But I think Morocco is an important test case, and it's an important test case in this sense. It's a test case of whether a conservative monarchy or whether any authoritarian government can respond effectively to the political upheavals of the Arab Spring through a process of managed top-down change, or will it prove too little too late, especially given the revolution in people's expectations of their governments and the revolution in people's expectations of themselves and their own ability to force change that we have seen over the course of the last 9 months or so. Now the 3 dictators have been overthrown and others are under pressure in other countries. So in this overall context, there are some worrying signs for the government as it approaches the elections. First of all, the constitutional changes brought about by the referendum in July were seen by many people in Morocco as simply reshuffling the political deck while leaving the main levers of authority in the king's hands. Partly for this reason, the February 20th movement has organized demonstrations calling for a boycott of the elections. They've dismissed the king's reforms as nothing but window dressing, calling them a facade democracy. There is concern that electoral turnout will be low, as it was for the last elections, I believe in 2007, there was no more than 37%. And if that's the case, it might cast some doubt on the outcome of the elections and the future of the reform agenda in Morocco. And in the meantime, of course, political protests continue in the country, although certainly not on the scale that we have seen elsewhere in the region. And I think most importantly, the conditions that helped breed the Arab Spring in the first place, high unemployment, corruption, a sense that the government is not fully responsive to the people's needs, are all very much present in Morocco. But Morocco has its advantages as well. King Mohammed VI, unlike some of the other leaders in the region, is popular and widely respected. Many Moroccans are very wary of sweeping change, having seen what happened when that occurred in Algeria in the 1990s, and they are cautious in embracing it. And of course, Morocco is not new to the reform agenda, with the king having introduced a number of political, economic, and social reforms starting in 2003. In any case, the stakes are high. Moroccan internal stability can have an impact on what happens elsewhere in the region, especially Western Sahara and Algeria. If there were a descent into political chaos, this could open another arena for Al-Qaeda in northern Africa. And of course, Morocco has seen its share of terrorist attacks, most recently in Marrakesh in April. And this is also, obviously a concern in Libya as well. Morocco's future is also a real concern for Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf countries, which invited Morocco to join the GCC to help shore up their King's Club. They must worry now that either movement towards a fully constitutional monarchy and more representative government, or the alternative, movement towards a more chaotic political future, could have implications for themselves. Now, for the U.S., these concerns also matter. The U.S. considers Morocco to be a key partner in promoting regional security and stability. Morocco is designated a major non-NATO ally of the United States. It contributes to UN peacekeeping operations, and it participates with U.S. forces in military exercises in Africa. Morocco has also been something of a showcase for American democracy promotion efforts. In 2007, Morocco and the U.S. signed a 5-year Millennium Challenge Compact Pact totaling just over $697 million. USAID manages a long-standing program of assistance to Morocco that in fiscal year 2009 totaled $18 million, one of whose principal pillars is promotion of government responsiveness. And Moroccan civil society receives approximately $1 million a year from the Middle East Partnership Initiative at the State Department. So the administration also views Morocco then as a bellwether of the prospects for peaceful political change, or shall I say, managed change in the Middle East. On a recent visit to the region, a senior State Department official praised Morocco for, and I quote, making the right choice to stay a few steps ahead of the Arab Spring, unquote. But he warned that the U.S. is waiting to see whether the promises of reform will be matched by the reality of reform. That's a key question going forward from these upcoming elections, and I think it's going to be a key question for our panel today. We're very fortunate to have three very distinguished panelists to speak on the elections, what they think will happen, and what are the prospects for change afterwards. Let me introduce first Anwar Bukhars, who is a former visiting fellow with the Brookings Doha Center. Anwar specializes in Arab democratization, U.S. policy in the Middle East, and international security. He currently holds the position of Assistant Professor of International Relations at McDaniel College in Maryland. Marina Ottaway is Senior Associate in the Middle East Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She works on issues of political transformation in the Middle East and Gulf security. She's a longtime analyst of the formation and transformation of political systems. She's also written on political reconstruction in Iraq, Afghanistan, the Balkans, and African countries. And Ahmed Ben Shemsi is a visiting scholar at Stanford University's program on Arab Reform and Democracy at the Center on Democracy Development and the Rule of Law. His focus is on the democratic grassroots movement that recently burgeoned in Morocco, as in Tunisia and Egypt. Before joining Stanford, Ahmed was a publisher and editor of Morocco's two best-selling news weeklies, Kel Kel in French and Ishan in Arabic, which he founded in 2001 and 2006, respectively. So please join me in welcoming our guests, and we will then turn it over to Anwar. Thank you.
So, after Tunisia's landmark election, it's now Morocco's turn to go to the polls and try to replicate that historic achievement in democracy. Such feat will naturally be hard to pull off in Morocco. The Herculean task of gaining voters' confidence and trust is amply visible during the current campaign for the November 25th legislative elections. Very few Moroccans believe that the country's established political parties can take advantage of the opportunities that the new Moroccan political pact offers. So without viable alternatives, many are asking whether it's worth to vote in the upcoming elections. Let's talk a little bit about the Constitution. Despite its failure to significantly limit the king's powers, the 2011 Constitution provides a margin of political maneuverability that did not previously exist. Most importantly, it enhances legislative capacity and access to the policy realm. It also desacralizes the sovereign's acts, the king's acts and power. Under the proposed reforms, Parliament, which had long been relatively weak, now has the potential to play a more assertive role, and in theory, will play the leading role in the legislative process previously dominated by the king. For example, the exercise of parliamentary oversight of the executive branch is strengthened today by lowering the threshold of launching investigation. All you need right now is just 1/5 of its members. And then you can introduce a censure motion against cabinet ministers, and all you need is 1/3. The new constitution also sets in motion a decentralization process whereby more power is devolved to elected regional council. But the key question, however, is whether Morocco's political parties are up to the task and they are ready to push the democratic envelope on constitutionally permissive activities. Constitutions matter, but what matters more is what people do with them. Thus far, most political parties have failed to generate popular enthusiasm and interest. Even the most credible opposition party, the Islamist Party of Justice and Development, the PJD, it pains to convince voters of its capacity to effectively shape the development and governance trajectories of the kingdom. Nevertheless, like Tunisia, the kingdom's own legal Islamists, the PGD, are expected to gain in the polls and to improve on their current 47 seats in parliament. So predictably, parallels are being drawn with Tunisia. Riding the Islamist wave across North Africa, the PGD is viewed as an election favorite. Such scenario elicits some unease within the corridors of power, within some feminist movements and secular forces. More importantly, the post-election government will draft many of those laws enshrined in the constitution that we call organic laws. And this is really what makes this legislature so strategic. In reaction to such eventuality that the PGD, for example, wins and takes control of drafting these organic laws, a liberal-led coalition of political parties was formed on October 5th, what Moroccans call the G8, and its aim is to staunch PGD win or to counter any possible alliances that the PGD may seek to forge after the election. This is a loose 8-party pro-monarchy electoral bloc called the Alliance for Democracy. It declares that its aim is to prevent the balkanization of Morocco's already fractious political landscapes. You may know there are over 30 parties that are contesting these elections, but its true aim is to stem PGD's win. The biggest players are the Authenticity and Modernity Party, POMED, which was founded in 2008 by a close associate of the king, Fouad el-Himma. It subsequently won 19% in local elections, prompting speculation today that it might become a significant new force in Moroccan politics. In parliament, this coalition, 4 parties in this coalition, they make up 48 seats in the current parliament, and they do have a formidable electoral machine, especially in rural areas. The other parties that are included in this bloc is the center-right liberal popular movement, which won 41 seats in the last parliamentary polls. The Royalist National Rally of Independence, which won 39 seats. It also includes Constitutional Union and 4 other small parties. One is Islamist, and another one is left-wing and an ecologist party. So media observers believe that this bloc of the G8 is capable of becoming the largest party in parliament, which would allow the monarch to pick one of its members as prime ministers. Now to the concern about the PGD. I mean, in Tel Quel, for example, I haven't read the piece, but I just saw the edition today. It says, "Quand le Maroc sera islamiste." Alors, they predict an Islamist win in the new elections. I think despite the concerns about a PGD win, informed observers believe that this fear of the PGD is overblown. The Islamists in Morocco, and these are the legal Islamists obviously, are probably slated to gain in representation, but they are by no means the favorite. The PGD will certainly not win an absolute majority. An absolute majority is about 198 seats, 200 seats. The best the PGD can do is 80 seats. The best it can do is 80 seats. So even if the parallel with Tunisia is interesting, we're another one, the context is quite different from Morocco. Unlike votes in Tunisia, the November 25th polling day in Morocco is likely to see a low turnout. The enthusiasm of the electorate is not there. Number 2, the Islamist spectrum is divided in Morocco, unlike in Tunisia where we have one major Islamist party, the Nahda. In Morocco we have 2 major parties. The largest, or at least the one Moroccans believe it's the largest, the Justice and Charity Group, L'Adl wal-Ihsan, is illegal, it's tolerated, and it has called for a boycott of the elections. Had L'Adl wal-Ihsan put its weight behind the PGD, the latter, PGD, would probably win the elections. The militants of L'Adl wal-Ihsan are extremely disciplined, and it's highly unlikely that they will defy their leadership call for boycott and support the PGD. Number 3, redistricting laws or electoral laws also disadvantage the Islamists. Malapportionment favors rural areas where the Islamists have almost no support. The same problem is in the Sahara, where they're able to use Islam to lure the disaffected electorate in rural and tribal areas. So despite the PGD's skill at reaching across economic and social classes in urban areas, in rural areas it has so far failed to do so. Meanwhile, the National Rally of Independence, Istiqlal, the PAM, have won over local and tribal leaders. As a result, these three parties will harvest the vast majority of rural votes. Now to the scenarios. There are three scenarios. The first scenario, the PGD wins the elections, and the king tasks Secretary General Ben Kiran or Ottomani to form a government. Please note that the constitution does not say that the king has to pick the head of the party, but he can pick any member from the party that wins the majority votes. Given that the PGD, there is no scenario in which it can win an absolute majority of votes, 200. There's just no way that can happen. It has to find partners. The likelihood is that the PGD would partner with the Independence Party, Istiqlal, and most probably also with the Socialist Union of Popular Forces and the Party of Progress and Socialism. All three parties, and they are the only three parties that they have not ruled out joining the PGD. Istiqlal, the Independence Party, should be a natural ally of the PGD, as both parties share the same conservative leanings. We have also seen that the PGD and Istiqlal, their syndicates or their unions, have been coordinating their actions for some time. Those that want to block the Islamists from governance would seek to pressure these major parties not to partner with the PGD in order to prevent the PGD from forming a coalition government. This would actually be very dangerous, and it also would be counterproductive. Dangerous because the last thing you want is to give the perception that the PGD wins the election and there are some outside forces or hidden forces that have prevented the PGD from heading the government. Remember, the PGD tries to portray itself as the firemen. That's the word they use, which means we are the only bulwark, right, between the monarchy and the street. Counterproductive because the PGD understands that it cannot ignore the secular parts of the electorate. If you look at its platform, it has 5 priorities, right? Islam comes number 4. The first priority is strengthening the institutions. Second is economic reforms. Third is socio-economic development. And fourth, Islam. And even when they talk about Islam, they talk about it as a reference. It means social justice, transparency, etc. So the PGD, like Nahda in Tunisia, they're not stupid. They understand that their countries face daunting challenges, and whoever governs will obviously need to tackle the tremendous economic and political problems. Then there is the second and third scenario, which will simply underline the trends of the past decade, whereby voting fails to alter the political landscape. The vote will follow the pattern of influence buying and tribal considerations. We will see block voting in rural areas by illiterate peasants. In the southern provinces, Western Sahara, votes will be based on tribal ties and influenced by tribal sheikhs. Istiqlal, PAM, and the RNA and Popular Movement will compete for a pole position. So in scenario 2, Istiqlal comes first, Independence Party, like it did in 2007, and it will form a coalition with the Socialist Union of Popular Forces and the Party of Progress and Socialism. L'USFP, it was traditionally seen as Morocco's center-left force, and it's currently a member of the government. It was formed in the 1970s and is, along with the rest of Morocco's left, widely seen as a fade-in force. The party won 38 seats in the last elections, down from 50 in the 5 years before. In this second scenario, probably Istiqlal and the two center-left parties would not be able to have a majority. And this is where the PGD comes in, right? Second scenario, Istiqlal comes first, USFP, the PPS, and the PGD join. So there is a likelihood that the Islamists join this second scenario. In the third scenario, the National Rally of Independence comes first, and the current finance minister, Mzouar, is tasked with forming a government with his coalition partners in the G8, in the G8. So in both the second and third scenarios, the election process will not fundamentally alter the country's political landscape. The king will end up choosing the same actors to form a coalition government. Obviously, we'll see new faces, but it is the same actors. So skeptics of regime-led transitions will cry foul in this scenario, contending that, as they predicted, the limited scope of political concessions that the monarchy offered has done little to promote democratic practices, combat clientelism, and reinforce the rule of the law. The February 20th movement and the Banned Justice and Charity Group have called for a boycott, but it's important to know that even if the second scenario or the third transpires and there is a low turnout, that the February 20th movement and Al-Adl wal-Ihsan will not necessarily, the low turnout would not signal support for these groups. A result that favors the status quo may renew protest activity, and it might push the king to make further changes. But activists, whether from the February 20th movement or Al-Adl wal-Ihsan, they must develop long-term strategies. They have to articulate a positive agenda, because that's probably the only route, at least for now, to democratic progress in Morocco. The Moroccans, they have very few good models to imitate, at least for now. That's the sentiment in the street. Supporters of the political reforms will urge patience, because despite its elitist nature and undemocratic nature, the new Moroccan political pact is desirable, as it constitutionalizes the principles of individual rights, freedom of association, criminalization of torture, arbitrary detention, citizen equality. So transitional periods, argue its advocates, are naturally characterized by limited levels of democracy. But as civic consciousness rises and political competition becomes fully routinized, potent political parties and civil society actors are bound to emerge, strengthening in the process the institutions of government and driving levels of democracy up. In my interview with Natmani in the PGD, this is exactly his view. He said if the elections are free and fair, because I asked him, don't you have concern about the ability of parties to renew themselves? And his answer is no, as long as the elections are free and fair. I mean, that would push political parties to renew themselves. So there is an unprecedented opportunity for political parties. The Constitution offers some tantalizing possibilities for change, and the question remains whether Morocco's political parties would take advantage of that. And I'll just stop there.
Right, thank you very much. Marina?